to Anchors Away, the podcast that chronicles a landlocked new sailor's journey to finding freedom and adventure at sea. I'm your host, Todd Middlebrooks, and I welcome you along on my journey. Welcome back to the Anchors Away podcast. In this episode, we're talking about our recap from a recent sailing trip to Key West, Florida. In a previous episode, I talked about planning a short trip and whether or not it was worth it. Well, we actually wound up planning that trip and making the trip down to Key West for 5 days total. We got about 3 days out on the water, which was great. And this episode is kind of going to recap what we did and summarize that trip. So on the first day, we arrived a little bit early. Our flight got in a little early, and it was earlier than Florida Yacht Charters was expecting us. So we got to have lunch together as a group before Karen and I headed over to the Florida Yacht Charters office for the charter briefing. The rest of the crew was able to enjoy the swimming pool because it was a hot day. So they stayed cool by the pool for a little bit while we spent the 2 hours in the charter briefing. It was a very comprehensive briefing, one that I actually really enjoyed, and I wish more charter companies did because they made sure that we were comfortable with the area, the types of things that we could expect out on the water and in the anchorages, and just overall helped us to feel more comfortable with the area. We went over all the charts in detail based on our float plan, which we discussed. We did make the east itinerary, so because of the trip was kind of short, we didn't head out to the Dry Tortugas. We headed east towards Newfound Harbor, which afforded us more snorkeling opportunities and things of that nature, since there was not likely to be a whole lot of wind for sailing. In perfect timing, right after our briefing concluded, our provisions showed up. The nice thing about provisioning in Key West is it was done through Instacart via Publix, which is something that we do at home. So it was super convenient and not quite as challenging as it can be in the Caribbean at times. So we grabbed a marina cart and met the Instacart delivery folks and loaded our provisions up and carried them back to the boat. Once we got everything unloaded, unpacked, and stored all of our provisions, we got ready to head to historic Key West. One of the great things about the Ocean's Edge Resort there, the marina that we were staying at, is they offer a complimentary shuttle every hour to historic area of Key West. And so we took advantage of that and went downtown and walked around on Duval Street for a little bit, and decided to eat dinner at Sloppy Joe's, one of the icons right there in the northern part of historic Key West. After dinner and enjoying some live music at Sloppy Joe's, we walked down to the Key Lime Pie Bakery, which is where the key lime pie originated in 1856. After picking up a few slices and a full entire pie to enjoy the rest of the trip, we hopped back on the shuttle and headed back to the marina for the evening. Day 2 started with us going over the actual boat briefing, so looking over the systems of the boat, doing the inventory sheet so that we knew where everything was. We checked off that it was in fact present on the boat, which is another great idea and something that is loosely done on other charters, but you actually have to sign off on this inventory sheet and text it back to the base manager in order to get approval to leave, which seems tedious, but it was actually really nice and covered us as well. We slipped the lines and headed out about 11 a.m., a little later than I had anticipated, but it was all good. Again, we took the eastern itinerary, so we were headed towards Looe Key Reef to snorkel on the way into our anchorage for the night. We maneuvered out of the channel, raised the sails to ensure that we could, raise and lower the sails properly, and that all the rigging and everything was working on the boat, which it was. I did leave the sails up for a little bit, just being stubborn and trying to sail. We did have to motor sail because there was very little wind, and I eventually did give up and furl the sails back in, and we motored the rest of the way to Looe Key. On the way, though, we did see several dolphin, which was exciting. They didn't swim with us very long, but they did swim right off the bow of the boat for just a little bit, long enough for all the crew to get up there and see. So that was exciting. We did decide to stop at the reef on the way to our first anchorage, which was about 22 miles away from the base, and that's the very first anchorage that you get to on this eastern itinerary. So it took us about 4-ish hours to get from the base to the reef, and where we picked up a mooring ball. That process went very well, and we got tied off to the mooring ball very easily. Experienced mooring ball crew, so it was not a big deal at all. It was very hot, and we were eager to hop in, so we quickly got our snorkeling gear together and jumped in the water, and were immediately surrounded by probably the most fish that I have ever seen while snorkeling. There was a good bit of growth on the hulls of the boat, and so I think the fish just flocked right to the boat in order to feed off that growth, and it made for a great snorkel. The reef was in very good shape. It's very protected, so it was quite healthy. However, we didn't snorkel too far out onto the reef because a lot of the fish and wildlife was right there at our boat. We saw a couple of nurse sharks. We saw tons of a variety of other fish, and we saw a handful of grouper that were 300 plus pounds. I had read about these large grouper before we left and was hoping to see some, and they were right there swimming around underneath our boat. In fact, a lot of the other dive boats in the area, their divers came over and dove the bottom near our boat, and so we were snorkeling at the top, they were diving at the bottom, and we just had thousands and thousands of fish between us. So it was absolutely amazing, really. After we departed the Looe Key Reef, we headed towards Newfound Harbor, which would be our anchorage for the evening. And on the way, just after leaving the reef, we saw a huge sea turtle swim right in front of the boat. We saw another excursion boat pointing and coming actually towards us a little bit, and I was trying to figure out what was going on, and then we saw this gigantic sea turtle pass in front of the bow of the boat, so that was exciting to see as well. It was only about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes from the reef over to our anchorage, where we snaked in a narrow channel. It was very shallow on each side, but the channel kind of wrapped around Picnic Island and brought us around to the deeper portion of the anchorage where we would drop the anchor and spend the evening. It was getting kind of late, and we were planning to head a good little ways in the dinghy for dinner, so we put off visiting Picnic Island until the next day, and we got ready for dinner. Dropped the dinghy in the water and made the 2.5 mile trek from the anchorage under the bridge to Kiki's Sandbar, cool little kind of waterfront beach bar. We had some great dinner, ate outside, and enjoyed some live music and watched a beautiful sunset. And then we had quite an adventurous dinghy ride back where it was pretty dark. We had headlamps and a very bright spotlight that we had brought from the boat, which helped. But it was a long dinghy ride back in the dark. There were a couple other boats out there as well, so it was important to make sure that we were seen as well as seeing them. Also, it was kind of a shallow path back. You had to kind of go past the shallows and then kind of bear around back to our boat. And a couple times it got pretty shallow, so we had to slow down and make sure that we were clear of the bottom. It had been another long day in the sun and out on the water, so we slept very, very good that night. The morning of day 3, we woke up and had our big breakfast. We always try to have at least one big breakfast on the boat, and that's what we did this morning. So we enjoyed that breakfast on anchor in Newfound Harbor. Then we weighed anchor and headed back out the channel in Newfound Harbor and continued east towards Bahia State Park. There was still not much wind, so we were going to be motoring probably to the state park and back. The arrival at Bahia State Park was really cool because we got to pass through a section of the old bridge there that had been removed, and so we had plenty of clearance because it was wide open to get through there into the little anchorage outside the state park. Our first attempt at dropping the anchor was unsuccessful as we drugged, so we picked it back up and kind of relocated just a little bit, dropped the anchor, and then made sure it held, which the second attempt did. We then lowered the dinghy and headed the short ride over to the little park area where we checked in and then hiked up to the bridge. It was kind of neat. We couldn't get right up to the edge, obviously, have it gated off, but it was neat to walk up on top of the bridge and get a view of both the open water and the state park side of the bridge, which was really cool. We took some photos up there and got some videos. It was a good time. We didn't stick around too long though, because we did want to get back and visit Picnic Island. So we once again motored back to Newfound Harbor, where we'd stay for the night again and drop the anchor there. The bottom holding was much better in this anchorage. It was mostly sand and seagrass, and so it held really well. We dug the anchor in on the first attempt, and then we dinghied over the short little ride to Picnic Island. It was golden hour. So the sun was getting low, and it was great for taking photos, and we had a great time walking around, reading all the signs that had been put up on the trees. We then walked over to visit Captain Jack, who is a local legend, who has built his kind of like houseboat on top of pontoons. He built this boat out of shipping containers in Indiana, and then shipped it down piece by piece and assembled it where it sits today off of Picnic Island. It was quite an experience getting to meet old Captain Jack. He offers all of his guests a free shot of chilled Fireball for guests to enjoy. And we just sat and chatted with him for a good little while. And it was fun to meet him. And he had just started this thing where he was letting people, he had markers out to sign his boat there. And so we signed our names up on his vessel, and it was a good time. It was a good time. Quite the character. If you're ever in that area or you're visiting Picnic Island, I highly, highly recommend going to meet Captain Jack. As we were getting in the dinghy to head back to the boat, he left us with kind of a parting joke, which was pretty funny. He said, you know, the first thing you do after you have a boating accident in Key West, right? We were like, no, what? He goes, you get out of the boat and stand up. Joking because the area is so shallow. As we arrived back at the boat, the sun was just starting to set, and so TJ and I both got our drones out and started flying around and getting some quick sunset video of the anchorage there and of Picnic Island, and it made for great photos and great videos, and so I'm glad we had a chance to do that before we lost the light. We enjoyed a very beautiful sunset, again, making lots of photos and capturing lots of memories. Then we prepared for dinner, which was going to be taco night on the boat, which is always fun. That's kind of one of our traditional on-boat meals, and so we really enjoyed that. And then after we cleaned up from dinner, we played games, which is pretty common practice on our charters as well. On the morning of day 4, we had a little more wind, so after we exited the channel there in Newfound Harbor, I unfurled the jib to try to capture some of that, and still had to wind up motor sailing because it was just, we were downwind, and it helped a little bit for a little while, but as the wind started to tail off later in the morning, I just had to furl it back in and motor. It was more trouble than it was worth, to be honest, and then it was also hindering visibility of the crab pots that were everywhere. I mean, thousands of them that we had to avoid. We had to play slalom with, and so it was more important to have visibility than it was to try to sail a little bit, so we went ahead and just furled that in. And then just before we got back to the channel, we heard a large boom from a big thunderstorm on the horizon, which was actually pretty wild to see. It did skirt around us to the west end of Key West, and we only got maybe 30 seconds or so of sprinkling rain from it as we entered the channel. We did a great job of getting the fenders and lines prepped, and had a excellent docking by the crew at the fuel dock, where we topped off fuel, and then headed back over to the T dock where we tied back up. It was kind of exciting there. We had to back into the spot, even though it was on the T end of the dock. We had to spin around and back in between the dock and 2 mooring balls that were kind of marking that slip, and then also kind of parallel to another sailing catamaran, which it was exciting. But the crew did great. We did a good job, and we got the dock lines, which were still on the dock from our departure the other day. We got those back on board, and everything tied up like it was when we left. And everybody did a great job. We had arrived back at the marina right around 3 p.m., a little before, and so we had most of the afternoon to head back into Key West to walk around and do some things that we wanted to do before we had to leave. So we showered off real quick and then got ready and got an Uber this time because we didn't want to go to the drop-off point of the shuttle. We wanted to head down to the southernmost point for a photograph, and it was super, super hot, and we didn't want to walk from the shuttle drop-off down there. It was about a mile or so. So we had an Uber directly to southernmost point. The line was short. There was a cruise ship in port, but it had just left. In fact, it was departing as we were trying to get our photos. So all those people, the crowds were pretty much gone. We waited maybe 5 or 10 minutes in line and got our family photo at southernmost point. And then we grabbed another Uber back up to Duval Street, the northern end of the historic area, where we visited Margaritaville, the retail store, walked around a little bit, went back to the Key Lime Pie Bakery to pick up a few more goodies. And then we headed over to Shrimp Boat Sound Studios, which is where Jimmy Buffett recorded 12 of his albums, and a lot of other great artists like Alan Jackson and Zac Brown Band have done some recording. So it's kind of cool to see that. Doesn't really look like a whole lot from the outside, but if you know where it's at, you know where it's at. And you could tell because there's stickers all over the place and a lot of people taking pictures. So that was cool to see. And then as the sun began to set over the harbor there, it was a beautiful sunset. We grabbed a table at the Conch Republic Seafood Company and enjoyed another great meal right there by the boats in the harbor before catching the shuttle back to the boat, which was just really right around the corner from the restaurant. The morning of day 5 is always the least fun part of the trip. This is where we had to pack up all of our stuff, clean up the boat, get everything off the boat. We'll hose down the exterior of the boat, top off the water tanks, and then prepare to depart. We did have a bunch of leftover unopened water and drinks and snacks. There was another family that was on a charter right behind us, and they had hired a captain, and I started up a conversation with the captain, asked him if he wanted any of that to take on their charter, which they graciously accepted and thanked us for. So it's always exciting to be able to help another charter get off on the right foot and give them some goodies for their trip. Then we grabbed our bags and met our shuttle driver who picked us up to take us back to the airport where we had lunch before hopping back on the plane back towards Atlanta. So to summarize the trip, it was short, it was very hot, but that was to be expected since it was August in Florida Keys. We did have a great time. We made the most of it. We didn't get to sail a whole lot because the wind just was not in our favor. But the seas were calm, which made for clear water, which made for excellent snorkeling. So that was fun. The trip to Bahia State Park was fun. Hanging out at Picnic Island was awesome. And meeting Captain Jack was well worth the experience. The Ocean's Edge Resort and Marina, where the boat was located, is fantastic. We enjoyed the pools. We enjoyed the restaurant. The showers were very, very nice. And I would highly recommend that resort or marina if you're in the area. And we had a great experience with Florida Yacht Charters, and I would highly recommend them as a charter company to anyone who's looking to sail in the Florida Keys. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning into the show. Be sure to subscribe and have future episodes automatically docked into your favorite podcast player. Until then, anchors away.